sameness is kind of just, it's a comfort that you fall into, right? Neil, you said it best, that a lot of times, especially like working with developers and things like that, they're looking for something that is quick and easy, that sells and can turn around. And sometimes, it's the factory mentality, and sometimes it's just, of the area. But I mean, it's something to kind of like quickly turn around. But then you also have kind of the opposite thought, is that you can still make it something quick and easy because you're working with the same kit of parts, but something that's very unique to the place.
Yeah, kit of parts I hate that term.
Welcome to Archispeak, the podcast that talks about what it's like to work in the profession of architecture.
Welcome to episode 110 of the Archispeak podcast. I'm Neil Pan.
I'm Evan Drexel.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
And this episode of Archispeak is sponsored by ARCAT and BQE Software. We'll talk more about each of them a little later in the show.
All right, so let's just jump right into the show. And I was thinking about a topic, and it was a series of conversations that I had. One, it kind of started with my wife, then it carried over the next day into conversation at the office. And then the third day in a row, it carried over into an airport bar where there was a doctor, a lawyer, and an IT guy.
Oh, man, where's this joke going?
No, those were the guys that I was actually talking to. So I've been thinking a lot about this, and honestly, this stemmed mostly from just a question that started with my wife. Now, neither one of us are from the DC area. We're both originally from the Detroit metro area, and I predominantly grew up in the Tampa Bay area of Florida, and she grew up mostly in Michigan and then moved down to the Tampa Bay area where we met many years later. And through that time, we ultimately landed in DC, and we've always said, is this the place we want to stay? Now, both of you guys are living in the places that you grew up in. You've been a part of that community, and you've been a part of where you've been. It's shaped who you are and things like that. And I've been somewhat of a Bedouin. I've moved from place to place. I've been overseas and lived there for a while, and and all these different places. So I've seen a lot of different places, and I know you guys have traveled a lot. So more recently, I've been going back and forth between the Baltimore office, where I'm based out of with the firm I work for, and we have a DC office. And I drive into DC from the suburbs, and then once I get into DC, I kind of take this not so direct path into the office, and normally I pull up Waze or Apple Maps, and just kind of it takes me in whichever way it goes. And most of the time, it takes me different ways. So this is a very long route to get to where I'm going here, but bear with me for a second. So I've been noticing that every time I drive into DC, as I'm driving from the Maryland suburbs, which has a very similar kind of feel to, kind of almost an anywhere kind of feel, America, into the city. And when I get into the city, it feels like one place and one place only, Washington, D.C. It feels like no other place that I've ever been to. And we've been to several different AIA conferences, and, we've been down to Atlanta, and we've been to D.C., we've been to the Philadelphia one, and where all of this is going is, the other day my wife asked me, she goes, okay, so we've never really been sure if Maryland and DC was the fit for us, if we wanted to go back home to Florida or maybe go home to Michigan and things like that. And she asked me, she goes, you want to stay here, so why do you want to stay here? And I went through this whole conversation about how I like the aesthetic of this place. I like that this place feels like DC and DC only. The architecture, everything about DC feels like DC. And when you go to places like, say, Florida, or to the suburbs of Metro Detroit, they've built up and they've become very suburbanized. They're the same things, the same businesses, and they have a sameness to them. She kind of understood where I was going with it, and then I sort of was having the same conversation at the office. More of just kind of like a conversation that just spawned off of the question that my wife asked. But then just a random meeting between a bunch of people in a St. Louis airport, all waiting to go to either Boise. One was going back to the Baltimore area like I was, and one was going to Detroit. And then there was me. And this physician, he kind of sparked up the conversation, goes, so where are you guys from? And, we all started talking about it. And as he was talking about moving from the suburbs back into the city of Detroit. And his reason and rationale behind that is he wanted to move back to a city that had an identity that was different than the suburbs, that was different from everywhere else, that had its own kind of unique nature, something that felt like Detroit and Detroit only. And I started thinking about that. It's like, what makes where we live, or what makes the larger cities and stuff like that more appealing? Because there seems to be a mass movement more recently, especially with like the millennials, to move back into the city and be a part of something that's unique rather than same. And so I've really been kind of dwelling on the sameness.
Yeah, you should come to Orange County.
Yeah.
It's all the same, and it's spread way outside of there too.
Well, what's interesting about when I came out and visited you and driving around some of like the areas, like say just outside of like Western LA County, a lot of it kind of feels the same, but it's got a little unique nature. But then when you drive into your town, Claremont, Claremont feels very different from even its surrounding areas.
I think that has to do with college towns, though, more than anything. I don't know. I could be wrong there, but a lot of college towns that I've visited have that kind of feel, and it's maybe because they've been established for longer. I mean, we're on the West Coast. We don't have nearly the history that you guys do back on the East Coast, and so the urban planning is a lot more, I would just say, haphazard out here with a lot of the urban sprawl that's happened. But if you go into actual cities where urban planning was a much bigger deal, and especially when you're talking about DC, right? I've been there a few times, and you're right. It has its own iconography. It has its own. It's very strongly identifiable by just the layouts and the edges and the monuments and the landmarks and all that kind of stuff. So it's right. Very much a city with an image that is unique to itself compared to, if you come out here, you can't tell where one town starts and the next one is, because there aren't edges here. The edges are the freeways, and you use the freeways to travel through the towns, and so everything's connected, and it's very car-centric back here. It's different. So
well, but Neil, you just went on kind of a day trip vacation for your kid's homework assignment, and you were talking about you'd just gone to Carmel for the first time, and how does that feel, or how does it kind of? I mean, to me, when we went to Monterey together, nothing about, and I grew up on a coastal town, St. Petersburg, Florida, feels completely different from anything that I saw in California on coastal towns. And there's just this kind of unique nature. I was even thinking about this as I was driving in through I drive through and drive up North Capitol Street and things like that. I'm driving through Northwest DC, the more affluent neighborhoods, and I'm getting into Northeastern DC, closer to the train station and things like that, and just a few blocks away from the Capitol building when I'm in the DC office. And the interesting thing about it is that Baltimore, we saw it in Philadelphia, it's up in New York. I mean, the row home building type, it feels very different in each of those places, even though it's the same kind of, probably the same layout, the same floor plate size or things like that. For some reason, the housing type feels very unique to DC, more so than other places. But then when I go to Philadelphia, and we walked around, Philadelphia, and we were had the great tour around, like, say, the Eastern State Penitentiary and things like that, that the row homes that were there felt very unique to its place. Just kind of curious.
Yeah. I it's interesting because it's the same thing we struggle with on projects, which is giving the project an identity.
Thank you. That's where I was actually going.
But also stitching it in and making it contextual to its place. Because, this is one of the big problems I have when I see student work or certain professional work, too. I've been to Hernan Diaz Alonso's lectures at SciArc, and, you see Morphosis buildings, and you look at stuff done by Eric Owen Moss. And, these are iconic architects, and they do contextualist buildings also, right? They're not fitting in. They're doing everything they can to stand out.
Honestly, that's sort of where I was going with it, and I kind of was taking the long route to get there. But
well, yeah, it's a weird thing, because especially when you do university work and, well, let's just say educational work, you're trying to typically do a small project on a large campus.
Yeah,
and
yes.
So you're talking about the same thing. I don't know, Neil, you could probably talk about doing residential work when you've got neighbors on both sides. We see a lot of residential work where the beautiful photography of the house on the knoll looking over the sea, and it's all by itself, and there was nothing to try to stitch it in with all of their neighbors, because there aren't neighbors. But that's rare. That doesn't happen so much.
Right.
This happens on a lot of projects, is how do you fit in and give something an identity?
Well, what's interesting about that, and Neil, I'm going to throw a little bit more residential stuff at you real quick, and please interrupt anytime. But, one of the things that I was looking at is, so I drive out of the suburbs, and I'm watching all of these developments pop up all around me. And I've seen this house or that house that's now taking over, like, say, just even my neighborhood, which were these really small 1950s, late 40s, early 50s developments that were popping up around. They were post-war developments that were popping up around major government campuses, like, National Institute of Health, NIH, is just a couple blocks away from where I live. And so a lot of these developments popped up around those areas where people were going to be working. And they're nothing to write home about. They're, these little teeny, split level ranchers or, really small houses. But there's something that somewhat semi-unique to the area. Brick construction, and they feel... I've seen other ranchers all around, but this one just seems to have kind of a Maryland flair to it. But as they're being demoed and replaced with a much bigger house, they're just out of a catalog. They look like Anywhere USA. And the character of the place is being left behind by just the need for larger, bigger, let me maximize the footprint on, the buildable area on my site kind of feel. And that starts to almost suburbanize some areas that otherwise had character.
Well, I think each residential neighborhood is a reflection of the time that it was built. And sometimes that's a good reflection. I believe that most of the time we look at maybe houses from the 20s or 30s, or perhaps there's not a whole lot out on the West Coast that's neighborhoods built up from before that. There's certainly plenty, but at least in the Bay Area here, it's mostly houses from the 20s and the 30s, maybe even a little older. What I'm trying to get at is we look on those houses as something that's nice and of a style and architecture that we seem to appreciate. And I think some of that goes back to the craftsmanship that was put into those houses that were typical of the time that they were built. You had craftsmen building the houses, so you get a lot of good detail to those houses. And then we had a little strip away from that detail once we get into post-World War II, when the houses were just being built to house everybody that was coming back from the war, and people could afford a house. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. But we have some nostalgia for even those homes, and maybe into the 60s. But over time, these styles change. And I think that a little bit of that goes throughout the country. I think you see a lot of very similar type of housing in all across the country, just based on the time that it's built. And we seem to have this, there was certainly a period of some not so great residential housing, 70s, maybe the 80s, and I don't know, probably all the way up to today, right? But each group of housing you can look at and say it's a product of its time. And whether that's good or bad, it is what it is. And you get that sameness throughout the country or all over. I think today we have a lot of that, maybe even blowing up of houses because, we have a need for larger houses. Some could argue we don't, that a family of four lived just fine in a 1,200 square foot house, and they don't need a 3,500 square foot house.
Or a family of five in an 800.
All right, but, very true, Cormac. But I would also argue that it's not 1950 anymore, and our needs or desires are different, right? The way we live in our houses now is different than we lived in our houses then. I'm not trying to justify bad architecture here, but I'm just saying that the times are different, right? Nobody's going to go out and build an 800 or 1,200 square foot house and expect to sell that for $1 million out here on the West Coast. Well, actually, it depends on where you're at. Maybe that would sell for $1 million. But my point is that if you're going to remodel your house or you're going to build a new house, you're going to build to what you think the market is going to bear today. And that's a very different market than it was in 1950. But I want to say one more thing on that, which is I think that a show like shows on a program like HGTV right now, only because we don't normally get that channel. So that's what my wife enjoys watching when we're on trips. But I think a lot of people see that and they see what other people are doing and they want the same thing.
So, well, you actually bring up a good point. Now
they want sameness.
Yeah, well, yeah, in a way they do. But you were bringing up a good point about, and this is more unique to single family homes than, multifamily. But multifamily isn't void of the comment I'm about to make, is that one of the things that people do when they're building a house is they're not building it for longevity. So back in the day, we're starting to sound all reminiscent here and everything, but back in the day when somebody was building a craftsman house, going and flipping through a Sears and Roebuck catalog and said, that's the house that I want, and have the materials sent out to them, and then they, ultimately built the house or had somebody build it for them. There was a lot of sameness going on, but the house was being built as, okay, I'm going to live here, and then maybe my children will live here, and maybe their children will live here, kind of thing. They never really thought about the return on their investment. They were building it to live in it and not think about how to sell it. Nowadays, we literally are thinking about as you said perfectly, about how the market is going to view any choice that I make about finishes or anything else, or the way that it is, or how many bedrooms it's got, or the size, and what is it, how is it versus the rest of the houses in the neighborhood, and so on and so forth.
It's really obvious why, right? Because we live in a different time. We live in a time where we can hop on a plane, hold on, let me finish. We hop on a plane, we're across the country in 5 hours, right? And that was not the way people from the 1800s or early 20th century lived. They grew up in an area, they built their house, it was on a farm perhaps, and they lived in there. They lived there or no more than 5 miles away from there for the rest of their lives. And people don't live that way anymore. We have jobs. You fly to St. Louis for your job several times a week. And so people move more. So there's a very different mentality to the whole thing.
So there's something funny about that, though, from you.
Okay.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up right where I live.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Evan, where did you grow up?
But that's that. But what I mean is that I'm unique in that sense, right? I mean, I know plenty of people I went to high school with that don't live anywhere near here anymore. They live across the country. They live in other states, north, south, wherever. But my point is that people don't enter the equation anymore in the same way. So they don't think that way.
Let's take a minute out of the show here and talk about RCAT. And so what's the one thing we all do in our practice? We all search the internet for content, right? Well, we want to let you know about arcat.com. RCAT is an online resource devoted to bringing content to the building professional. They have huge libraries you can access, and they don't hit you up for subscriptions. There are no fees, and they won't make you register to download the content. We've all been there. You finally find the right file, and you get blocked with a registration pop-up, and you think, thanks for wasting my time. I'm going to go find it somewhere else. RCAT's BIM library is really second to none and available in just about any format you need. In fact, their entire BIM library is formatted for the last 5 versions of Revit, and their CAD detail library has thousands of CAD details. And if you need specs, the RCAT library is the most consistent library you will find. Every single spec is written in the CSI 3-part format. There's so much more on their site, including catalogs, videos, and Spec Wizard. Go to arcat.com or download their app to check it all out. It's a great free resource that you don't have to register to use. Check out RCAT today at arcat.com, and don't forget that you can provide feedback on the website. Just use the button on the right side of just about every page. And if you have a suggestion to make RCAT better, you can click that feedback button. You can also use it as a way to let them know that Archispeak sent you. So thanks, RCAT, for sponsoring this episode of Archispeak, and let's get back to the conversation.
One thing I want to get into is I'd also like to talk or mention about the whole sameness factor. And this goes, the more and more that we travel, and you mentioned earlier in the show that I was down in Carmel, Monterey this weekend. And what's interesting is that those are very unique places. And when we're in downtown Carmel, there are lots of different little, very interesting shops. And there's no sameness to the downtown of the city of Livermore that I live in, right? I mean, completely different places with their own unique architecture and style, right?
Yeah.
But yet, just like a couple of miles down the road, there's a big shopping center, and there's a Home Depot, and there's a Staples, and name your big box store, right? And they're all over. And it's just very weird that almost anywhere you go, it seems like in the country now, we have those stores everywhere.
And isn't it always kind of like just outside of the fringe of like, okay, here's like the cutesy little postcard downtowns. And then just outside of that, that's where everybody does their business kind of thing. You know, here's the Walmarts and the everything else. You know, which is interesting because so DC for the longest time basically shut Walmart out from ever doing business because they've got strict guidelines for big box retail and stuff. And Walmart never really wanted to conform to it. And ultimately they did. And built one-off, very unique Walmart buildings. And as weird as this is going to sound, some of the better-looking, more recent construction has been those Walmart buildings. They've got just this kind of architectural factor to them that's a lot different than a lot of other places. Unfortunately, I don't have any photographs of them, but I mean, there's like a little. One of them's got a brick colonnade out front, with some exposed steel and glass, and it just has kind of a flavor to it that fits very nicely into the surrounding neighborhood.
Where I've seen that, Cormac, and examples of that around here is McDonald's. There's a McDonald's in Fremont in the Mission District, which is an older neighborhood, actually just down the road from Mission that's in Fremont. And you look at that McDonald's, and it doesn't look like any McDonald's you'd ever see anywhere else. It is built like an old Mission, and it looks great, actually, as a McDonald's. And I bring that up because I saw another one today in Monterey, and it didn't look anything like a McDonald's. It didn't even have yellow golden arches. They were black to match the other black accents on the building to look like a building that would be appropriate to see in Monterey.
Yeah, the cities have gotten a lot tougher in the last 10 years on that kind of stuff with their specific plans, and everybody has to fit into that. And that, I think, is in response to what you're talking about, Cormac, where they want their city to have that identity and that feeling and that history. Even when new things come in, right, they've got to kind of match. It's a really weird thing. I mean, you guys were talking about post-war housing and how people ordering houses out of Sears catalogs. I don't think it's that much different today for the majority of the population.
No, it isn't at all.
Yeah, and so, I mean, people want to shop for a house like they want to shop for a car because they're not comfortable going to an architect and putting their life savings into their hands. And so they go and they want to buy something that checks the boxes. It's got this many bedrooms, and it's got this many bathrooms, and it's got this many car spaces in the garage, and it's okay. Well, maybe one less because I'm going to put the office in instead, and then there you go. It's a custom house, right, with quotes around that.
Yeah.
And so, but for the most part, I mean, this is where people don't realize how architects can make a difference in their communities, and they can make their house fit them like a glove, because they don't understand the concept of that. They're comparing themselves to everybody else. They want to be the same as everybody else for the most part, or they want to stand out with one more car garage, or in very small ways. So it's a real catch-22 for the profession that we're in, I think, because you are talking about a very small percentage of people who are willing to go through what it takes to build a house that is going to last for generations, which I think people idealize that as the American dream, when today I think people are still doing exactly what they were doing then, which is not like planning generations. They're planning for, this is what I need right now. And I need it quick. I need it fast. I need to be in that house in 6 weeks. And so it's kind of the race to the bottom with, developer-led housing tracks like this. They're slamming them together as fast as they can and put them as close. Drive down the freeways. These houses are 5 feet apart on the freeway. It's craziness, the stuff that we're building, and because of these housing shortages that are in the urban areas,
right?
And so they're just cramming these houses together as much as they can, even though they don't have to, farther away from the urban centers, and it's just totally screwing up the landscape, and it's making it so that you don't have cities that feel like anything. It's like you could be anywhere and you can be nowhere at the same time, and it all looks the same.
Exactly, and that's what's been somewhat, I guess, mentally distressing me, because you just look at these things. Another thing we've up in Baltimore, where our office is, it's in a lot of old factory buildings and stuff like that they've converted into office buildings or residential buildings and stuff like that. So, it's got it still has a very Baltimore feel to it. Because these buildings have been a part of the landscape of Baltimore for, the past 100+ years. And so they've been there and they've developed around them, and the language that's developed around them has just helped it, kind of augmented what was already there. And a lot of the same thing, in our DC office, but in the DC office, a lot of the area where the particular office is this new development area. It's called NOMA. It's north of Massachusetts Avenue, I guess is what the acronym is. And the acronym never existed until a developer got a hold of it and created some thing. And now there's this whole branding effort going on for this particular neighborhood. And originally it was a lot of, maybe 2-3 story row home type things that were basically leveled. And so there was these big tracts of land that were just empty and vacant for long, long periods of time that were just north of the U.S. Capitol building. And now that they're under development, they all look the same. The office buildings, the residential buildings, they look like stacked rectangles that, to differentiate themselves between the two, they do a change of material, or they get a little quirky, like picture framing around the window kind of stuff. And
this one's got the shutters, and this one's got the bump out. See, they're different.
Yeah, but I get off the plane in St. Louis, and I'm driving into, or actually taking the metro into where the Washington University is, and I'm driving past some developments, and it looks the exact same as what was being built in this NOMA area of DC. And then you go into some of the more developing areas in Baltimore, and sure enough, they're building the same damn high-rise residential that looks exactly the same as the one I just saw in St. Louis or DC or down in St. Petersburg, Florida, or up in Detroit, Michigan. And it's just it's annoying.
Okay, so
you jump in, Neil.
Yeah, so I got two things to say on that. First off, do I need to call us out on our own bullshit here and just say that we're three old guys yelling at the fact that, yelling at the cloud, get off our lawns? No. Times change, right? Times change and development change. The factors involved in development change. And, yes, things are being the same. Well, yes, they do. You just said they do. Well, but let me give you some
go ahead.
background into maybe why we're seeing some of this, at least from a home developer aspect, because that's a good part of what I do. And I mean, part of it is that we used to have home developers that were smaller developers, family owned. They would go develop different pieces in their areas, right? And slowly over time, and I've seen this really happen over the last probably 30 years, and it's probably been a little bit longer, maybe 40 years, is that more and more of these smaller individual, somewhat unique developers are all being bought up, or have been mostly all bought up, right? We all have heard the names Lennar and Pulte and some of the other large, all of these large home builders. Well, what they've done to expand over time, because they have shareholders and they always have to show they're making a profit, and they can't have any down quarters, and they always have to be expanding, right? They're
I do not
a growth.
Understand that. Yeah.
Well, that's Wall Street, and I don't even want to get into that. But the whole thing about that, though, is the cost of what's happened is that these national developers are buying up all of these smaller developers. They come in and say, okay, this is brand X way we do things. This is the way we do our houses. And oh, by the way, we have our plan book over here. So here's our houses that we have been successful with, right? So they don't pick bad stuff. They pick stuff that's sold. And it's like, well, this project has sold really well, or this particular plan, or that particular plan, or elevation style. So we're going to pull it over here, and we're going to go build it over here. And then we're going to go build it over there, and we're going to go build it over here. And then they come to California, and we go, yeah, they ain't going to fly here. And I can't speak for the rest of the nation, but I do know that I've seen this over and over, where these larger home builders come in, and they come into town, cities that I work in around here, and they go, okay, well, here's this house from Texas, and here's the elevations, and we're going to put it in your town. And most of the planning departments go, yeah, no, that's too plain. That's too this. And a lot of that happens.
So they take the same floor plan and they Californiaize it, or
well, sometimes that happens, Cormac, but other times they start fresh. We do a lot of work here that it starts over, and they just do stuff here. And they're not very successful. And I'm speaking mainly in the Bay Area and some of the areas around here. Where I have seen it be successful is out in the Central Valley, where the cities out in the Central Valley in California aren't as, I don't want to say sophisticated. That's not the right term to use, but at least for their housing stock, that maybe they're not as picky. Maybe it's a better word about maybe how it looks or how it's done. They have much more land, so they're not as concerned with certain aspects of specific zoning or something. They don't maybe have design guidelines because they haven't needed to in the past. So then developers come in and they say, well, there's nothing that says we can't do that. And the cities are stuck, right? They're like, oh, well, we don't have any requirements or guidelines for this. And then suddenly they develop them after they've had a few projects built, and they're very unhappy with them, and they should be.
Well, you know what they do, though, is that, if a city does have a design guideline, they're like, well, we're not going to work in the city, but we'll work just outside of the city where that domain doesn't hit.
Sometimes that happens. I mean,
so
that happens here in the counties. That happens in the county, and the restrictions are less restrictive.
I mean, and then, of course, you've got everybody who's complaining about, well, you've got these design guidelines, so it restricts, the architectural freedom of me being able to do this or that. And so, what's
that's
the point
bullshit.
I know. Trust me, I know. I'm just saying, this is the argument that you hear often when you have design guidelines like that. I was in Annapolis today, and when you were here, Neil, we went over to Annapolis. Where else in the U.S. do you feel, have you seen the city of Annapolis or felt like it was, to me, I always feel like it's somewhere very unique, very different than everywhere else. There are similarities in architectural styles and stuff like that, but the assemblage of buildings, the way it was built, the way it developed and all that other stuff, it's purely unique to Annapolis. And that's what I like about these places, is that they have their own identities. And these constant developments that are the cookie cutter national houses and stuff that come in and, well, this house is really old, so let's tear it down and let's build a McMansion or some 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 square foot home that's fresh out of a catalog, that their national leading seller or things like that, or like they're doing in my neighborhood where they're taking down all these little houses. And I'm not saying that these little houses are anything to write home about. They're not. They're tiny little ugly houses. But as they've grown up,
well, they're just turning them into giant ugly houses.
Exactly, they are very much so. There are 3 houses in a row that look the exact same, and they're painted the exact same, and the only way that I can tell the difference between the 2 or the 3, is that one has a unpainted fence in front of it, one has a painted fence in front of it, and one doesn't have a fence. And that's it. That is the only way you can tell the difference between the 3.
Well, so are you asking everybody who remodels their house to actually have taste? Because that's a tall order.
No, Evan was touching on it, about the value of an architect. Bringing in, an architect rather than a developer. And even,
okay.
Look, wait, real quick, before you start yelling at the clouds. I worked in North Florida, specifically in an area called 30A. So along the 30A, and there's plenty of people who are going to be listening to this who know exactly what I'm talking about. There are tons of developments. But the one thing that's great about these developments is they all have design standards. And each one of these, you basically have this, accepted list of architects that can build in there. And, it's not exclusive. You can, potentially bring your own architect. But they're all architect-designed houses in all of these things. And they're very unique. We've all learned in school about the planned community or the traditional neighborhood design community of Seaside, Florida. And if you haven't, you should look it up because That was one of the ones that started it. Well, there's a bunch of these new urbanist developments throughout this area in there that all have a unique character to them. And each house is different, has a similar language because that's part of the design standard. But as a assemblage of a whole, this whole area of 30A, which is kind of been adopted, the nickname the Design Coast, it has a very unique flavor to it that's like no other place in Florida because of the fact that the developers there, and it was all developer-led development or construction there, but they had the sensibility of wanting to do design work, not let's just put a bunch of Pulte homes or Lanier homes or Ryan homes or whatever homes, brand X homes. They had the idea that we want this to be unique, and that's what actually got it to sell. Not that, hey, you can go out and pull a catalog home, but you can have your own built to suit home in this community, but it's going to be unique to you. And even if it's a vacation home or your home for maybe 10 years before you grow out of it and move on and all that other stuff, but it's unique, and each one of them were unique, and that was what I liked about it. I mean, hell, Frank Lloyd Wright designed he wanted to do a larger developer community, but in New York, kind of just outside of the city, it's this place called Usonia. And Usonia it was started by him, just kind of designed by him, but a lot of the people that were working with him designed a lot of these homes. So there's a bunch of unique homes, but it's this kind of architect-led developer community, and it's a bunch. I think it's like 30 homes or something like that are all of these. I'm getting a little off of kind of where I am, but I mean, it was just this whole. Everything was a little bit different. Everything was, designed, and I guess that's kind of where I'm going. Is like, come on, here, man.
I have one response to that. First off, there's plenty of bad architecture out there. Just because a house is designed by an architect,
98% actually.
Yeah, maybe so. That's I'm
Frank
one,
Gary's
probably.
number.
That's right. Yeah, so I clearly fall into that category. But that's not always going to be the answer. And for every developer out there or home builder, they all have different priorities. They're all businesses, and they have to make money, and they're doing their part, right? And nobody wants to go out and build garbage, but sometimes that happens. So
garbage.
Yeah, it's the nature of things. Not everything's going to be perfect, right? Or the best house or the best building. Let's take a quick break here. I want to actually talk about how architects can run their own businesses maybe a little better so that we can do these great buildings or great houses.
2%.
And the 2%. Well, I don't want to say this is for the 2%. This is for the other 98%, no. Right? So, we one of the things many of us struggle with is doing timesheets, keeping track of that information, dealing with invoicing, dealing with keeping track of your budgets and projects and things like that. And our other sponsor here is BQE Software, and they have a product called Archispeak, which is designed specifically for architectural offices to do all of those things. So BQE Software is an AIA Advantage partner, and they, as I mentioned, are the makers of Archispeak. And Archispeak is the only office and project management software designed specifically for architects, and it will help you manage people and projects while you focus on designing great architecture. Whether you're working remotely or on-site, Archispeak allows you to monitor the status of your projects and tasks and send out invoices in accurate and timely manner. And I know that's a huge issue for a lot of architects, is getting those invoices out. And if you want to get paid, then check out Archispeak, and it'll help you do that. So our podcast listeners, by the way, can get a fully functional 15-day trial of ArchiOffice at a special link. So there'll be a link in the show notes for this. But if you're writing it down and if you're driving, don't stop and write. Or you can stop and write it down. Don't try and do it while you're driving. But anyway, so that special link is www.bqe.com/Archispeak. So check them out. No installation required. You can get it up and running in seconds. You can work from anywhere at any time, and you can try it risk-free, no credit card required, no obligation, no risk. So go to bqe.com/Archispeak and download ArchiOffice and give it a try. And we want to thank BQE for sponsoring this episode of Archispeak.
All right, so I've got a question now for the thinking about the work that each of the firms you work at does. Is there a common thread through it all, or is it very piecemeal, stylistically? I don't know the right way to say that, but
it's interesting that you bring that up, because I was just having a conversation when I was thinking about Sameness about a common architectural language for the firm, and do we have one? And we don't, because we're working across campuses, nation, hell, worldwide, and each of them are unique. Each of them have a very different feel to them, and there's a little bit of sameness in the way that maybe we approach, kind of some of the interiors, if it's, a classroom or things like that, because, we are talking about, like, what does it mean to be a, let's just say a lab building, or, the classrooms, and how does a nursing school function and work and things like that. So, but I mean, like, let's take, for instance, we have a project down at Auburn, and, I was just commenting that our building is very Auburn. It fits the campus. It is, it works within its context. We've got a couple of other projects going on right now, and I'm not going to say them because I don't know if I can. I'm allowed to, but we've got a couple of other buildings that we've got in the works, and each of them are different buildings, different building types and things like that are on different campuses, and they feel there's the language of the campus. It's unique in itself, in the way that it kind of like fits within within the campus, but as an overall language, it's not too foreign from it. It fits in, it plays nicely, it plays well with all the others. But I don't think that it's creating, to me, in a way, I don't feel like it's creating sameness.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about it from a firm perspective, because, our firm is 9 offices, I think, and, over 300 people. And you start to think about the project typologies. There's K-12, there's higher ed, there's civic, there's healthcare. It would be really difficult to have a language or a style that maybe that firm subscribed to. And honestly, I don't even know what that really looks like, because you're looking at,
well, yeah,
you're looking at, like you said, fitting into so many different contexts that are really client-based, region-based, entity-based, so that it would be really difficult. But I think that's also a strength of going to work at a company like that, because the work is so ranging that it doesn't box the designer into that style or that way of thinking, and it really does allow for that freedom to happen. I don't know how you could even do that, but what I liken it to is maybe an author who writes a series of books. Like think about Harry Potter, right? That author does that one thing and they do it really well. Or think about a band. Think about the Police or the Beatles, or I guess the Beatles is a bad example because they kind of reinvented themselves through different albums. But there are some bands who have a sound, And to me, that's their language. It's their sound.
Right.
It's not the language they speak. It's how they sound. And so there's definitely architects who are like that. I can think of books that I have in my library right here that speak a language. Like, think about Tom Kundig, right? It's exactly what I'm talking about. We don't have that. So it's a very interesting thing when you think about sameness. Like, are you constantly evolving the language, or is it just a different language depending on who's designing and the project and the client and all that stuff?
Well, I brought this up when I was, having that. God, you hit almost perfect. It's like you literally were sitting at the table with me, because we were talking about that very thing when I was talking about sameness with the people in the office, and I was specifically talking about how more recently the whole top 100 architecture firms and things like that, and both of our firms are on the list, but one of the things that was low ranking for us was design. And we've got a lot of really good buildings that we've done, and each of them I think are very unique in their approach. We've got design awards recently for a couple of travel plazas that we did in Maryland. And if you look at these things, they're very unique to the typology of a travel plaza, but I think they speak to what a lot of people think Maryland is, but still with a very unique approach. And I think about all of the firms that are ahead of us, both your firm and my firm, that are ahead of us, that scored very high on design, and they have a very unique to the firm design language that is the same carried out through every one of their projects, no matter where that project is. And one of them that comes to mind is Caltrava. So when you get Caltrava, what kind of, you're going to get a building that has a somewhat similar language. You click on, you go to his website and you click on some of the more recent buildings, and there's the building, the university building that he did in Florida. It's kind of blanking. I think it's like Florida Polytechnic University.
I can see it in my mind.
And it's got a very similar language to, say, the Milwaukee Museum or the new transit building in New York.
Right.
And even though they are different, they're very similar.
Well, they come from the same pen, right?
They come from the same pen,
yeah.
But that pen doesn't. And I know that this is going to piss a few people off. It doesn't seem to care about where it's striking. It's the same strokes no matter where. I've seen the transit building just from the outside, because the last time we were in New York, it was under construction, and it wasn't open yet. And I've seen a lot of people posting a lot of beautiful images. It's an absolutely beautiful building. But is it New York? Does it feel like New York, or does it feel like it could be anywhere? Could it be picked up and put somewhere else?
Right.
I would argue that it both has some New York qualities, but it can also be anywhere.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and this is again why I feel like it's to the advantage of working at a company like the one that I do, because so to give some examples, I designed a library in the mountains, and I designed a community center down in the unincorporated area in Los Angeles, and there's nothing between those two buildings that is shared, right? It's not, it's one of those things where
right.
It is, the problem was solved for, it was their problem in the mountains, and it was their problem down in Whittier. I mean, it's completely different set of problems, and it is a solution for them. And I don't know how you do that when you have a kit of parts. And I think that's something that really annoys me about certain designers that I've either worked with or that I know or that I've just seen their work, where they're using the same kit of parts over and over and over again. And I just wonder if they don't have any new ideas.
Well, it's interesting is because I worked for a firm, and I worked for, there was a guy who was one of their lead designers, and he would it would almost be like a checklist of, I hit this, kind of design style, I hit this kind of thing, and it was all his basic kit of parts. And the assemblage of his kit was so confusing to me, and there was there was a lot of discontent from the owner. And then I became the project manager of the project, taking over from a friend, and she kind of had some similar issues where we had to contend with, basically kind of making this vision what it was. But then ultimately, thankfully, we got an opportunity to kind of change it from the standard kit of parts and change it to something that seemed a little more contextual. The sameness a lot of times can come from things like, well, you've got, your standard building, materials and things like that. And, so a lot of design is driven by the materiality. Well, I've also seen where you've got the same materials, and you can do completely different things with them. And, Kieran Timberlake is a great example of a firm that there's an interesting sameness in a way that you can kind of tell a Kieran Timberlake building, but each of them have a unique language that adapts to each project.
Yeah.
And
I know what you're talking about, and it's hard to distinguish between the two in words, but when you see it, you know it.
It really is, because, like they did a great building that they did locally here was an addition to Sidwell Friends school, a private school in D.C. where typically all of the president's children go to. And you can tell that it's a Kieran Timberlake, addition, but you can also tell that it's very it still fits that D.C. flavor, that even though this is a firm from, Philadelphia, it doesn't feel like it's just Philadelphia. I mean, it doesn't feel like, they tried to impose, a Philadelphia kind of sensibility onto a DC building. It very well feels like a DC building. And there's a series of libraries that are around town, and I believe 3 of them were designed by the same firm, and the firm it was Philip Freelon who did them, and he's out of North Carolina. Well, when he did them, each of those have a different flavor that fits the neighborhood that they're in. They're unique, they're different, but honestly, they fit that neighborhood. And I can't see them being picked up and put in another neighborhood, because they're contextual, but they're also unique, and you're right. It's really hard to put into words.
Think about when we were in Philadelphia at the Liberty Bell Center by Boland Sawinski Jackson. I mean, that was the same thing that you're talking about. It's contextual, it fits, and it's modern at the same time, and it's woven into the fabric of that downtown area of the Liberty Bell area, that it's just amazing the way that it's stitched into there, and at the same time feels new and fresh.
It's framed by kind of 70s high-rise or federal buildings, pre-colonial buildings. It's framed by all sorts of things, but it contextually fits.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it could be picked up and put somewhere else.
No.
Because it really just kind of responds to everything that's around it, but it's unique to itself.
Yep.
And it kind of fits. And I guess that's kind of where we're going, is that at the end of the day, sameness is kind of just, it's a comfort that you fall into, right? Neil, you said it best, that a lot of times, especially like working with developers and things like that, they're looking for something that is quick and easy, that sells, and can turn around. And sometimes, it's the factory mentality, and sometimes it's just, of the area. But I mean, it's something to kind of like quickly turn around. But then you also have kind of the opposite thought, is that you can still make it something quick and easy because you're working with the same kit of parts, but something that's very unique to the place.
Yeah, kit of parts I hate that term.
But you know what I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. It's so much a part of what I do on a regular basis, right? In most of my past work doing production housing, it's a big part of that. I do think, though, that you mentioned earlier about firms. What's the firm like? Is there a design language? And at least at the firm I work for, we're pretty diversified. We do quite a bit of different types of projects. Most of it is surrounded about residential, although a larger part is becoming more of a commercial, and always has been some amount of commercial. But there definitely was very early on, at least when I first started at the firm, back in the early 90s, there definitely was a very apparent design look to a lot of the types of projects, and whether they were commercial or even residential. And that was very much driven by the person who founded the firm. He had a specific language that he worked with, that he was good with, and it took the firm a long time to kind of grow out of that a little bit and expand on it. I shouldn't say grow out, but just expand on that. And there was certainly a good part of the firm's work that reflected that for many years. And the firm has changed a lot since then, and especially as the main founder has probably gotten to a point where he's less involved in the day-to-day aspect of the bulk of the work in the office. And other people have, spread their wings, maybe would be a term to use. But over time, though, a certain part of our work, though, is restricted to the particular type of business that we do, and that is being kind of mostly then the residential. So anyway, it's just very interesting. I don't like that term, but it is oftentimes most of what we do.
Yeah, I mean, and everybody likes to use that kind of interchangeable with design. It's, well, you got your kit of parts, and they think that it's design, and it's not. But yeah, I mean, honestly, guys, I didn't really think that we were going to, pull a full show out of this. I thought that, I just was one of the things that I've been thinking about, and so I'm kind of glad that you went along with me.
Well, clearly we have lots to say on the topic.
Yeah, probably a lot more, but, yeah.
Well, we have more episodes to come.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, before we leave this episode, we want to thank our episode sponsors. First, we have ARCAT. Check out all the features they offer at arcat.com. We're also sponsored by BQE Software, the makers of ArchiOffice. And ArchiOffice is the only office and project management software designed specifically for architects. Get a fully functional 15-day trial of ArchiOffice at bqe.com/Archispeak. And make sure you use that link, bqe.com/Archispeak. And make sure to also visit our website at archispeakpodcast.com for links to our catalog of episodes and to sign up for our newsletter, which includes links to everything we mention in each of the episodes. So between episodes, please join us in the conversation at the Archispeak Podcast Facebook page or through Twitter. Links to everything can be found at the site at archispeakpodcast.com. So say subscribe to everyone, and thanks for listening.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
I joined the choir to sing. They're all competing for some other thing. I joined the choir to sing. I joined the choir to sing. They're all competing for some other thing. I joined the choir to sing. my nation under God. Service my city with all that I've got. But when I'm running, pleasure is fear. So I run, I'm meant to run, this is clear. Say I eat, breathe, race my feet, my face, chase the one thing I